So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jerome. I'm one of two co-founders of goodcarbon. So we are a pre-seed company from Berlin. We founded in June last year, and our purpose is relatively simple. We want to restore nature. And we are offering a nature as a service platform for companies to take long-term action. And long-term action essentially means to get active on three fronts at once. Number one, to fight climate warming. Number two, to stop the loss of nature. And number three, to counterbalance the inequality of global income. And only nature can really fix those three problems at once. Nature is a massive decarbonization source. It can decarbon almost 10 billion tons of CO2 and thereby decarbonize the atmosphere. But it's the only asset class which can also protect and restore biodiversity, which is an equally big problem. And number three, if done correctly, if we restore nature, soil, forest, and the oceans properly, we can also yield an income for local communities, especially in the global south, where communities are impacted most by the consequences of climate warming. And the good news is that more than 4,000 companies are taking and have made commitments and pledges to take actions against climate warming, driven by the expectations of capital markets, driven by expectations of customers and suppliers alike. And many of these companies have committed to take action by rebuilding nature, by restoring nature and our precious ecosystems. And the market potential for that is estimated around $30 billion by 2030, which is essentially in 8 years' time already. But let me show you how the big guys are doing it. So the Apples of this world are moving away from short-term climate action towards proactive long-term climate action. So they are devoting millions and millions to set up their own projects, to set up their own funds, to restore nature in a conscious manner. Why do they do this? Because they face three challenges which are more particular. Number one, prices for voluntary carbon credits in the space of nature are going to rise if you believe in it's basically all the predictions say this. Number two, there is a shortage in volume. There is a reputational risk, and we have seen greenwashing scandals throughout the industry. And number three, and that's one of the most important drivers, there is increasing regulation, which asks companies, for example, in the European taxonomy, to provide more transparency on what kind of climate action they are taking. So you can't get away from just doing anything. You need to essentially do a conscious climate action in the future. However, there are three challenges which are attached to taking this conscious long-term climate action. Number one, availability of projects is scarce, and to get access to those projects is difficult. Number two, typically it involves a high minimum investment by project. So you speak about 1,000 hectares minimum, which obviously leads to a big cluster risk for those companies. And number three, typically those companies, they are not in the business of nature, right? So they lack the operations and they also lack the knowledge to run those projects successfully. What we offer through our nature as a service proposition is an ability for all companies to take long-term climate action in a low risk and high ease of implementation setting. And nature as a service essentially means three elements. Number one, we provide companies with access to high quality projects which are vetted by us, and we'll speak about that. Number two, we make nature which is very inaccessible to invest and clunky at times. We make it investable easily by tokenizing nature and building financial products on top. And number three, we enable companies to diversify risk by building a global portfolio which is forward-looking up to 30 years from now. Now let's look at those three things. Number one, nature as a service also means that we are providing high-quality projects for companies. How do we do this? Through three steps. Number one, we play with the rules of the market, meaning that all projects which are on our platform have been validated by one of the leading standards, such as Verra, Plan Vivo, or Gold Standard. Number two, we take in different perspectives, such as the view from rating companies like B0 and Severa, which are rating the risk of those nature assets, And number three, we build on top, especially by looking at the impact dimension, which is not covered by the standards such as biodiversity and social impact. And we also look at the risk component where B0 and Silvera, for example, are not looking at, for example, from emerging projects, right? Which is really where we can sequester carbon, right? So we need to bring more projects to life, and we also need to assess the risk and the impact of those projects. And eventually we rate them and we quantify the impact of those projects to make it for a corporate also comparable and to make essentially the pricing of attributes of projects more comparable and analytically detractable. Second, nature as a service means that we make nature investable easily. So what we do essentially are 4 steps. Number one, we detach a carbon stream from land. So if you have to buy a forest, you have to buy land typically. We detach the carbon stream from owning land. And that's essentially a legal step, right? We need to detach it. Number two, we tokenize the carbon stream from those projects and make it into fractions so that you can buy it as fractions. That's essentially a technical step. And the third step is that we translate those tokens into financial products under German financial regulation, which is a regulatory step. And eventually, companies can buy those tokens in a fully compliant setting, which comes with a liability umbrella and also KYC processes on the platform. So what are these three financial products? We have the spot contract, which is 1 ton of CO2, which has already been captured. We have the forward contract, which is 1 ton of CO2, which will be captured. And the stream is where we put our attention. This is a share in a carbon stream, which will sequester carbon in the future. Now let's look at the use case. Let's look at the use case for companies. Companies have made climate commitments over the next decades. Think of a company which is becoming net zero in 2040, right? That's a long time from now. And what most companies know is that they can't get there by reducing only. They need compensation to essentially achieve net zero. And that's essentially the curve which you see, the black curve, right? It's a bit fluctuating because it's scope 1 and 2 and then scope 3, but they need carbon credits. This curve is uncertain, but they know that there will be a base load which is required. And that's what we enable companies to contract already today by buying a carbon stream for the next 20 years through our stream product. For the next 3 to 5 years, they can buy, once the curve gets clearer in terms of shape, they can buy a forward contract. So they can contract today and get delivery in the future. And whatever remains is on a spot level. Now we have built 2 products to make that portfolio composition possible. An origination platform where you can directly buy those financial products from the project originators, which are in the other room. And number 2, a buy-side SaaS platform to involve the entire organization, especially multinationals, which want to break down climate responsibility on a business unit level. Yeah, so a buy-side SaaS and an origination platform. And our revenue model is relatively simple. We take a take rate for whatever is transacted on the platform, and we take a fixed SaaS fee for the buy-side SaaS, and that gives a high customer lock-in, simply because especially the stream product is one in which you contract today, but where you are essentially have capital calls over the next 20 years where we take a take rate. Yeah, so that's what you see on the top left. And this leads to also a customer lock-in for in-year purchases. Now, we are looking at a growth alley, which is the number of customers, but also more products to increase the share of wallet. We now have 15 million carbon credits of highest quality on our platform. Our tech product is live, and we are approaching the market and count DAX, MDAX, SDAX, and big private companies as our customers who want to take long-term climate action, and we are going to scale next year. Thank you very much.